Viewers may be aware of a story that hit the news this week that is now involving the youngest convicted killers in this country since the Bulger case 31 years ago, back in 1993 in Merseyside. Um, this case was in Wolverhampton, which is a city I know somewhat well because I studied there. I was there for almost 2 years in the mid 2000s. It was quite a rough place, at least it was when I lived there. But such is the situation now. I think this sort of thing could happen in almost anywhere in Britain, except maybe small villages in the countryside. Um, Now, the case is ongoing. Obviously, the defendants haven't been named. I'm going to get into different aspects of this, but the case is ongoing. No doubt, more details will emerge. I understand the trial and sentencing is set for July. I won't be here at that time, so I'm going to cover this now. I'm just going to read out an op-ed by Sarah Vine in the Daily Mail, which I think it highlights some aspects of the case, but also some things worth thinking about. I'm not going to read out the whole thing. She's making the argument that parents are to blame. I'm not going to read that part so much. I just want to read out the introduction, her introduction, because it lays out some aspects of the case. This is what I'm looking at. Very depressing picture there of one of the defendants. This is a thoroughly depressing case, but I always made a point in this channel to talk about things I felt needed to be talked about. As two 12-year-old boys are convicted of stabbing innocent bystander Shawn Seesahai, that's Seesahai, 19, through the heart in a park in Wolverhampton. Inevitably, there are searching questions as to how two children could have committed such a vicious and senseless crime. Both of them, the youngest killers since Robert Thompson and John Venables, were found guilty of killing 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993, had a history of violent and antisocial behaviour. One was obsessed with knives and machetes, posing in a balaclava with a weapon down his trousers in a classic roadman, this is to use vernacular style, just hours before the murder. He captioned the photo which he sent to his girlfriend and his co-defendant, Prison Freestyle, a reference to a track by the rapper S.J., real name Jaden O'Neill Cricklow, who, to use a vernacular, spits bars from behind bars, as he is serving time at His Majesty's pleasure. Just 17 at the time, O'Neill Cricklow was offered £150,000 record deal while he was awaiting trial. In a world where a conviction for murder and life imprisonment is no impediment to a lucrative music career, you could see how an impressionable 12-year-old might conclude, as he told the jury, that owning a machete was cool. After stabbing Mr. Seesahai so violently in the back, the blade went through his ribs and into his heart. The boy took the knife home and washed it with bleach because, as he told the jury, I heard it on music videos when they mentioned it bleaching it. Given all that, it is tempting to blame this tragedy on the toxic culture of gang violence and the drill rap that dominates certain sections of today's youth, and there is no doubt that looking at the details of this case is a significant factor. But if we really want to get to the heart of why children barely out of primary school are committing such heinous acts, we must look beyond the prevailing cultural currents and gaze deeper into the depths of our own consciousness. After all, drill rap, problematic as it may be, I would say that it definitely is, can't be blamed for the actions of Venables and Thompson, or those of Sharon Carr, who aged 12 stabbed 18-year-old hairdresser Katie Ratcliffe to death a year earlier in 1992. The same goes for the internet and smartphones. None of those things existed back then, so what to blame? There's another high-profile case involving a child killer, Mary Bell, in Newcastle. That was back in 1968. Certainly there was none of that toxic culture around. Now, her argument is about parenting. I'm not going to read the whole thing just for time reasons. My take on that is it's not the sole factor at all. Of course it's not. But I do think that there is a component there. I think that drill music is poison. I hate it. You just have to look at an average drill video to see the dark, dystopian, desensitized, grim, poisonous message that it sends out. Very often when it comes to, and just disclaimer here, this whole video isn't going to be about this. I'm just mentioning it because there's a lot of factors involved. But that whole world, you often hear people make this rather tiresome argument, oh, you can't just blame art. It's just art. It's just expression. That strikes me as astonishingly naive. You cannot tell me that a drill video specifically aimed at stoking up gang rivalries, specifically promoting violence, is anything other than poisonous to young minds. Now, I don't say rap. I say specifically drill because rap is a broader field. I'm not a huge fan of rap either, but I do recognise some rap is quite intelligent. I mean, I think there's a big difference between Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio, which is explicitly talking about the futility of that lifestyle, versus these low budget drill videos that are just literally encouraging young gang members to attack each other. It's, they'll often name each other, and then that gets into turf wars and so on. Anyone who says that's just harmless art is an idiot, is an irresponsible idiot, in my opinion. So I hate it, and I think it's right that mainstream radio stations ban that filth, that poisonous crap. I hate that stuff, but I don't say that's the only thing to blame. I think there is something deeper in this, and I think Sarah Vine makes a good point that you can find examples of this sort of thing predating the current period. But I do think that something that's happened in recent decades, and I'm not going to say that I'm not so kind of utopian or naive as to say in the past all kids were well behaved. It's not like that at all. There's always been crime, and there's always been some level of youth crime, incidentally. Now, in the past, often it was survival. You'd have, where there was no welfare state, where there was no safety net, it literally was often survival. Victoria and London had some pretty violent gangs. But I think what's happened in recent decades is there has been a desensitization among young offenders that maybe didn't exist as much in the past. I mean, they always had a contempt for the law, but at least in the past there was a certain degree of fear of the law. That's what's changed. I mean, 12 years old, and he's already killed a young man. By the way, the victim, when they interviewed his parents, I don't know when exactly the crime happened. I'm just looking now. I assume wasn't recently, because usually by the time these things come to trial, it's not saying specifically when the crime happened. I assume it would have been last year. But his parents, he come from the Caribbean. I think it was Antigua. I could be wrong about that. I think it was Antigua, for medical treatment in the UK. His parents showed incredible dignity. Incredible dignity. His father said, we're in a situation where we're scared of children. His mother showed incredible composure. These are people who lost their son to a violent crime. There's something timely here. This month in Sunderland, we have The Knife Angel by the artist, I think his name's Adrian Bailey, or Adam Bailey, but Mr. Bailey created this Knife Angel. It's made of 10,000 knives confiscated by the police. A lot of them are confiscated by the police. It was made in a workshop in Shropshire, but it's currently travelling around the country. It was made in, I believe, 2018, and it represents knife crime in this country. Now, I saw it. It's about 15 foot tall, very imposing, very sombre. There was a local tribute to a local knife victim here, Connor Brown, who was murdered in 2019. Knife crime. Looking at that, I'd say it's a little bit creepy, but it's more just as a sadness about it, a sort of somber feel about it. But I'm in the city centre here in Sunderland, and it's not Sunderland. It could be any city in the country. You see young children, basically, not even teenagers, children, and they're running around, without their parents, mouthing off to people, doing as they please, just throwing rubbish on the ground when a bin's nearby, just doing as they please. And clearly, the case in Wolverhampton is an extreme case. But the scary thing is, it's not some sort of freak outside incident. So it might be an extreme case, but there will be other 12-year-olds out there who have a similar mindset, and that is terrifying. Terrifying. As for a machete, As for a machete, there is absolutely no reason why anyone in this country needs a machete. In warm countries, a machete is used for agricultural purposes, for cutting crops. That's basically what it's a tool. But we know it was used in the Rwandan genocide, and now we're seeing it used in Britain as a weapon. Absolutely, the government should do everything in its power, or Starmer's government, when it comes in, should do everything in its power to ban the buying of these things. I just think it is insane that there is so much procrastination, and you hear things like families are calling for this weapon to be banned, and you think, why the hell is it not already banned? It's insane. Now, you can't ban knives because knives are an everyday tool. They're used for cooking, they're used for cutting rope. You can't ban knives, that isn't practical. But I think machetes, this isn't a country where, you need machetes, as would be the case in Colombia or the Philippines. What Britain we're talking about, no one needs a machete, so that should be immediately banned after this case. There's no excuses for not putting up a ban on that. It's not good enough, eBay saying, click a button that you're over 18. Anyone could do that. I think there needs to be much more stringent regulation there. And, there will always be people that say, oh, it won't change anything, I say, well, at least let's try. At least try. I don't accept this argument, oh, it won't change anything anyway, so let's not bother doing anything. I think toughened regulation there would be something. And, people will say, oh, but they'll get it anyway. Again, why surrender? This is a horrible situation. I can't imagine what the young guy's family are going through. Apparently, what happened, by the way, was it was in the evening and there was an altercation in the park. The details aren't certain, but I would imagine it went something like this. The guy was minding his own business, going home or going about his business. He's 19, so he's a young man. So there's no question marks on him being out at that time. I imagine the 12-year-old's mouthed off to him, and like any normal person, he probably spoke back because, children speaking like that and being, this is not a diagnosis, but I'm going to say it, being mini psychopaths, they then, laid into him. The thing that's scary about this is a 12-year-old isn't going to have a great deal of physical strength, but when a weapon's involved, it's just like, if you get a gang of 16-year-olds, they would have the physical strength to take someone down. But here we're talking about 12-year-old. It's just mind-blowing. I think, incidentally, we could talk a lot about the background when it comes to trial. Apparently, by the way, they were sitting in the dock with their parents, and the judges did not wear robes because they did not want to be intimidating. I think right there is a fundamental problem. Now, I know people will disagree with me. I know they will say, oh, but Nathan, they're just kids. These are kids who callously took a man's life. So I don't think they're going to be intimidated by a few robes. And if they are, is that a bad thing? They need to know that they're in court because they have done something evil, something awful. This isn't like, they've stolen a tenner from the parents or they've been caught smoking. They have callously killed a young man. This is just, I don't think they should be in an adult prison. Obviously not. They're 12 years old. But they should get a long sentence. I think it would be absolutely disgusting and grotesque and a travesty of justice if because of their age, they basically got away with it. And they were, given some sort of prolonged counselling and a community sentence or goodness knows what else. In the Bulger case, the killers actually were detained and they got assumed identities. As to them not being named, there's probably some legal reason for that. I'm not sure what it would be. It's not as if, we can't name them because it'll give them a bad reputation. They might not be able to get a job. They have taken a man's life. If for no other reason, the public have a right to be safe. There's two ways of looking at this. People could say they're children and we need to treat it sensitively in that regard. But the threshold has been crossed. So it's all very well talking about what could have led to this, and we have to have that conversation, but after the fact, there must be justice. I will always, always, always say put the victim first, even if the defendant is a child. Um, I don't think it should be the same treatment as an adult. I don't think it should be the same sentence, but it should be a tough sentence in a juvenile facility. I'm not saying send them to an adult prison, but they should be detained in a juvenile facility because they're dangerous, particularly the one that wielded the knife. I get the impression, a bit like the Thompson and Venables case, one was more of a ringleader. Um, but the danger is if they're not sent to prison, these young killers are showing that they're remorseless. They have no sense of the gravity of what they've done. They're very capable of doing it again. So for public safety, they have to be detained. For justice for this young man's family, they have to be detained. I will be so disgusted if I hear in July that they're going to avoid any sort of custodial sentence whatsoever because of their age. I think that would be grotesque. Now, as for the conversation, I mentioned earlier the thing about culture. I think that is definitely a factor. I think drill definitely plays into that. But you do have to, this sounds like a cliche, but there is a parental aspect to this. What sort of parent lets a 12-year-old look at drill videos? What sort of parent lets a 12-year-old out in the evening? I think the parents need to be heavily scrutinised in this case. If, I'm saying parents, it may well be singular. And I wouldn't at all be surprised if the father is a former armed robber and the mother's a heroin addict or you name it. But you may be surprised, it may not even be like that. Um, I do think that there is a problem in this country of overt leniency towards young offenders because I think it enables them. I mean, these are 12-year-olds, but even older young offenders, say 16, 17, there is this culture of, because of their age, we better not punish them. They still have a chance for rehabilitation. The idea of rehabilitating after the fact is an insult to victims. I think rehabilitation definitely, yeah, it plays a role, but I am such a strong believer in criminals facing justice. The idea that after the fact, the first focus should be rehabilitation rather than punishing them for what they've done, it sends out wholly the wrong message. And I think the very fact that judges are reluctant to wear the robes in case these violent young thugs might be intimidated, I hope they're intimidated. I hope they're intimidated because they have been in a situation where they're utterly desensitized. So maybe they need a bit of fear from authority. I'm not talking physical here, but that to me is wholly the wrong approach because they're going to get some sort of sentence. I hope it's not a lenient one, but they are going to get some sort of sentence and they're going to have to understand why they've got that. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of assessments on their mental health and all. But it just seems absurd that judges said they're not wearing robes purportedly so as not to intimidate them when they're going to get a sentence anyway. It'll probably be too lenient, but that to me is just ridiculous. I think, I don't know, there's no words for this. I mean, I have to say, I know, after reading a case like this, I'd be reluctant to tell off kids, vandalizing something because these days you don't know if they're going to pull out a knife. It doesn't matter if you're physically strong, a knife could hurt anyone. I've seen it, like I say, kids nowadays, at the risk of sounding like an old man, I'm only 38 myself, but they've just got no fear of consequences. There's no fear of authority. And I am convinced that the softly approach that our justice system has taken to young offenders has been abject failure. I do think that a harder approach, I honestly wouldn't rule out something like scared straight, that sort of approach. And the liberal left will say, that's terrible, you can't do that. I say at least give something like that a chance. Clearly the softly approach is not working. It just isn't. So at the very least, let's try it. I.e., you get a situation where hardened criminals are, keep them behind bars, but bring these children, young offenders to a prison. Let them see what it's really like and say, if you don't change your ways, you're going to end up here. And they'll be all mouthy and smug about it, but let them speak to a few of the hardened criminals. Keep a distance, keep the bars between them, etc. But Is it really such a terrible thing? Is that any more terrible than them being exposed to a world of what they are exposed to? I think parenting is a major factor. A major factor. I do think the glorification of gang culture is something that shouldn't be dismissed. You know, there will be people that say, "Oh, it's just art, Nathan. You can't blame that." Wake up. You know, I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it's clearly a component. I'm going to wrap this up soon, but it's so thoroughly depressing, and we need a situation where young offenders have a fear of consequences, and that is gone. That is gone. I think, by the way, the idea of getting a lucrative contract in prison, any convicted offender, child, teenager, adult, shouldn't be able to make any profit from behind bars. So how prison is run is actually a major factor. I support penal reform, not because I'm pro-criminal, but because it's in the best interest of the public. The fact that prisons are overcrowded, to me, doesn't mean let's release criminals. I think we should expand prisons. You know, we should build on existing prisons. I understand the controversy about building new prisons, because locals in the area would, be against it. But expand prison spaces. It's actually a win-win for everyone because it eases pressure on prison staff. It also eases pressure on inmates. So, people want to shout human rights. It actually eases pressure on inmates. It gives them, if there's a cell designed for two and it has four, well, surely that's it gives a better situation for the inmate as well. Hence, less pressure. Hence, less likelihood of disorder. Um, but if this sort of crime is not a wake-up call, then we need to take an approach that is. I'm not saying it's black and white. I'm not saying there's any simple solutions, but I am absolutely convinced that the approach of softly, softly to young offenders that has been taken in recent decades just doesn't work. We need young offenders to know that there's consequences for their actions, real consequences. You see, you have a situation where they themselves know, that their age protects them. That has to change. And you get the absurd Scottish Sentencing Council, who they're not even talking about under 18s, right up to the age of 24. They say international studies have shown the brain isn't fully developed, so they treat people under 24, not under 18, under 24, more leniently. I say that as a damning disgrace of the Scottish Sentencing Council. But the softly, softly approach to young offenders fails the victims. It has to change. Um, it's not a totally new thing. I mean, we could go back 15, 20 years. I remember the Gary Newlove case. It was a hallmark case. A man beaten up by a gang of teenagers outside his home in Warrington. His widow became a courageous campaigner for justice. She's now Baroness Newlove. That was back in 2007. That's now 17 years ago. You could go back to the 90s, the 80s. So it's not that this is a super new thing, but I am convinced the softy, softly approach does not work. You can be absolutely sure these 12-year-olds will live in a world where, whatever the background of their parents is, they have no fear of authority. That is a problem. That is a problem. And I'm not saying there's any simple solutions, but something has to change. Otherwise, we're going to get more cases like this. But as for this specific case, when it comes to sentencing, I don't think that their age should protect them. One of my friends made the point, if they're young enough to commit an adult crime, they should be treated as an adult. Now, I don't think they should go to an adult prison, but I certainly don't think it should be a case of judges don't wear robes in case it intimidates them. That is pathetic. If these young killers are in a world where they're listening to gangster drill videos, do you really think they're going to be intimidated by robes on a judge?